Hello, and welcome to the California Department of Education's Literacy Knowledge Building video series. In this two-part video series, we will learn about the purpose and best practices of culturally sustaining pedagogy. For this video, be sure to download the handout located on California Educators Together. This is a series of videos on critical topics in literacy birth through grade 12. It was developed by the California Department of Education and literacy experts from the state literacy team, and it is complementary to the work of the Federal Comprehensive Literacy State Development Grants. You can learn more about this grant here at https://www.cde.ca.gov/pd/ps/clsd.asp. The purpose of this video series is to provide guidance and resources on critical topics in literacy, to support the work of the CLSD grants, and to build coherence between California's literacy guidance documents, standards, and frameworks and how they all support literacy. A primary objective of the CLSD grant is to bring coherence among California's guiding documents, some of which you see here, like the California Preschool Learning Foundations, the California Infant Toddler Learning and Development Foundations, the California Practitioner's Guide for Educating English Learners with Disabilities, the California Dyslexia Guidelines, and the California English Learner Roadmap Policy. Other content area standards and frameworks support literacy as well. The videos produced in this series will illustrate the connections between all of these documents and also explain how the documents themselves support literacy development for our students. Videos will be produced over the course of the CLSD grant period. To be informed when new videos are posted, join the CLSD listserv by sending a blank email to join-california-literacy-states-development-program at mlist.cde.ca.gov. And now I will turn it over to our presenters.
Welcome to the Culturally Sustaining Pedagogy Knowledge Building Video Part 1. This is a two-part series within the State Literacy Plan Knowledge Building Video Series. In Part 1, we will introduce what is culturally sustaining pedagogy. We will explore the valuing of community languages, practices, and ways of being, and emphasize how schools are accountable to the community. I'm Gwen Lee, and I will be presenting with Barb Flores, Jennifer Elliman, and Amanda Turkey. In Part 2, we will examine features of a curriculum that connects to cultural and linguistic histories, sustaining cultural and linguistic practices while providing access to the dominant culture. There are embedded scholar talks within these videos in which experts share their insights on how to implement culturally sustaining pedagogy. We encourage you to access the discussion questions to deepen your learning and collaborate with colleagues to discuss implications for implementation in your classrooms, schools, and districts. We begin with defining culturally sustaining pedagogy. Culturally sustaining pedagogy exists wherever education sustains the lifeways of communities who have been and continue to be damaged and erased through schooling. This is a quote from Django Paris and H. Sammy Allen in the Education Week Teacher. They also state that culturally sustaining pedagogy seeks to perpetuate and foster to sustain linguistic, literate, and cultural pluralism as part of schooling for positive transformation, dynamic cultural dexterity as a necessary good, and view the outcome of learning as additive rather than subtractive, their languages, literacies, cultures, and histories. Not only does culturally sustaining pedagogy connect with our why as educators, it aligns with California's major guidance documents. A very recent publication, Improving Education for Multilingual and English Learner Students, Research to Practice, provided deeper guidance to support both culturally and linguistically sustaining pedagogy, which can be accessed on the CDE website. So who are California learners? Who are our students? This graph shows the ethnic diversity of California's student population: Hispanic Latino at 55%, white at 22%, Asian at 9%, African American at 5%, those who identify two or more races at 4%, Filipino at 2%, American Indian Alaskan Native at 1%, and Pacific Islander 1%. There was 1% that was not reported.
The table shows that in 2009 and 2010, Spanish was at 84.7%, Vietnamese 2.5%, Tagalog 1.4%, Cantonese 1.1%, and Hmong 1.1%. In 2014-2015, Spanish was at 83.7%, Vietnamese at 2.34%, Tagalog at 1.37%, Cantonese at 1.3%, and Arabic at 1.2%. And in 2018-2019, Spanish was at 81.56%, Vietnamese at 2.21%, Mandarin at 1.87%, Arabic at 1.53%, and other at 1.4%.
The top 5 home languages that English learners and multilingual students bring to California schools over the last 10 years have been 1, Spanish, 2, Vietnamese, 3, Tagalog, 4, Cantonese, and 5, Hmong. These have changed slightly since 2018 and 2019, with Spanish and Vietnamese maintaining the top 2 positions. Although both languages have seen decreases in the past 10 years, recently Mandarin overtook Filipino in the 3rd position. Cantonese and Hmong are no longer in the top 5 languages. Access and equity are central to all of the recently adopted California curriculum frameworks. California's students demonstrate a wide variety of skills, abilities, and interests, as well as varying proficiency in English and other languages. They come from diverse cultural, linguistic, ethnic, and religious backgrounds, have different experiences, and live in different familial and socioeconomic circumstances. The greater the variation of the student population, the richer the learning experience for all, and the more assets upon which teachers may draw. At the same time, however, the teacher's role in providing high quality instruction that is sensitive to individual needs becomes more complex. In such complex settings, the notion of shared responsibility is particularly crucial. The Fair Education Act, also known as Senate Bill 48, was signed into law in 2011. It requires that California's public schools provide fair, accurate, inclusive, and respectful representations of our diverse ethnic and cultural populations in the K-12 grade history and social science curriculum. According to the Fair Education Act, instruction in history, social science shall include the following ethnic and cultural populations in teaching California and United States history: both men and women, Native Americans, African Americans, Mexican Americans, Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, European Americans, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender Americans, and persons with disabilities. Members of other ethnic and cultural groups to the economic, political, and social development of California and the United States of America, with particular emphasis on portraying the role of these groups in contemporary society. Regarding instructional materials, California Education Code Section 51501 reads, "The State Board and any governing board shall not adopt any textbooks or other instructional materials for use in the public schools that contain any matter reflecting adversely upon persons on the basis of race or ethnicity, gender, religion, disability, nationality, or sexual orientation, or because of a characteristic listed in Section 220. For more information, visit the CDE's Assets-Based Pedagogy web pages. Assets-based pedagogy can be found at https://www.cde.ca.coe/pd/EE/ASSET-based-pedagogies.asp. From there, access more information on culturally sustaining pedagogy, culturally and linguistic responsive teaching, and culturally relevant pedagogy.
Culturally responsive and linguistic responsive teaching and learning. Culturally responsive teaching is an approach that leverages the strengths that students of color bring to the classroom to make learning more relevant and effective. A major goal of culturally responsive teaching is to reverse patterns of underachievement for our students of color. Culturally responsive teaching requires teachers to recognize the cultural capital and tools that students of color bring to the classroom and to utilize their students' culturally learning tools throughout instruction. Although culturally responsive teaching is inclusive of working with students from diverse home language groups, linguistically responsive teaching is called out by Cherokee Hawley's book, Culturally and Linguistic Responsive Teaching and Learning, 2017. Its essence also lies in viewing students with home languages other than standard English as assets that they bring to the classroom rather than deficits. Principle 1 of California's English Learner Roadmap expresses the needs for culturally and linguistically relevant education, stating, the languages and cultures English language learners bring to their education are assets for their own learning, are important contributions to learning communities. Drawing on extensive culturally responsive teaching research, New America, in their article, Culturally Responsive Teaching, a 50-state survey of teaching standards, cites 8 competencies that culturally responsive educators possess. The first competency is to reflect on one's cultural lens. Culturally responsive educators are reflective about their own group memberships that may be based on race, ethnicity, social class, and/or gender. They are cognizant that their life experiences and those group memberships may create biases that can influence their interactions with students, families, and colleagues. Competency 2, recognize and redress bias in the system. Culturally responsive educators recognize that their students' access to educational opportunities may be influenced by their social markers, for example, race, ethnicity, social class, and language, and advocate for all students to have access to high-quality teachers and schools. Competency 3, draw on students' culture to shape curriculum and instruction. Culturally responsive educators draw on their students' cultures and life experience when planning their instruction and reject instructional materials that contain cultural biases and/or stereotypes. They supplement the curriculum if it lacks the representation of their students' heritage. Competency 4, bring real-world issues into the classroom. Culturally responsive educators connect their curriculum to real-world problems and ask students to consider solutions to them. These issues may involve injustices that exist in their communities or nationwide. Through this process, culturally responsive educators empower their students to see themselves as change agents that can right the injustices that exist in the world. Competency 5, model high expectations for all students. Culturally responsive educators hold high academic expectations for all students and believe that all students are capable of academic success. According to Vygotsky, we have to organize the teaching learning to the potential and not to the developmental level of the student. Competency 6, promote respect for student differences. Culturally responsive educators are models for how all students should respect one another and embrace their fellow classmates' social, cultural, and linguistic differences. Competency 7, collaborate with families and the local community. Culturally responsive educators work to break down barriers that may keep students' families from participating in their children's education. For example, work schedules and language barriers. Culturally responsive educators make efforts to learn about the families and the community in which they teach. Competency 8, communicate in linguistically and culturally responsive ways. Culturally responsive educators understand and honor both the verbal and nonverbal culturally influenced communication styles of the community in which they teach. They also seek to communicate with parents that speak a home language other than English by utilizing translation services. In addition to refining our competencies as culturally responsive educators, we can establish culturally sustaining pedagogy across educational settings. Building on decades of asset-based pedagogical research, we include culturally relevant pedagogy, Lanston Billings, and culturally responsive pedagogy, Gay and Hammond, and linguistic pedagogy, Hawley. Culturally sustaining pedagogy affirms and respects the key components of an asset-based pedagogies that preceded it, but also takes them into the next level. Instead of just accepting or affirming the backgrounds of students of color as seen in culturally relevant pedagogy, or connecting students' cultural knowledge, prior experiences, and frames of reference as we see in culturally responsive pedagogy. Culturally sustaining pedagogy views schools as places where the cultural ways of being in communities of color are sustained rather than eradicated. Culturally sustaining pedagogy promotes equality across racial and ethnic communities and seeks to ensure access and opportunity. Culturally sustaining pedagogy also supports students to critique and question dominant power structures in societies. Django Paris and H. Sami Elim describe the key features across culturally sustaining educational settings in an Education Week author interview, Culturally Sustaining Pedagogies. The features are: 1, valuing community languages, practices, and ways of being. Students' languages, literacies, and cultural ways of being are centered meaningfully and consistently in classroom learning instead of being considered as add-ons. Schools, and number 2, schools are accountable to the community. Educators and schools are in conversation with communities about what they desire and what to sustain through schooling. 3, curriculum that connects to cultural and linguistic histories. Educators connect present learning to the histories of racial, ethnic, and linguistic communities, both locally and nationally. 4, sustaining cultural and linguistic practices while providing access to the dominant culture. Educators value and sustain the cultural and linguistic practices of the community while providing access to the dominant culture, white, middle class, and standard English speaking. The next feature of culturally sustaining pedagogy is valuing community languages, practices, and ways of being. Students, languages, literacies, and cultural ways of being should be centered meaningfully and consistently in the classroom learning instead of being considered as add-ons. To expand on this concept, we will hear from a scholar. Professor Rose Barunda is an associate director for the Doctorate in Educational Leadership Program at California State University, Sacramento, and has taught in the Masters of Science and Counselor Education program since 2002. She has been a member of the core faculty for the Doctorate in Educational Leadership program since 2011, and in the 2019-20 academic year served as interim director. Her experiences in child abuse prevention, school counseling, teaching at DQ University, and consulting for UC Davis Tribal 10th program. She gained insight to the capabilities of resilient communities. 2 of her books, What is the Color of Your Heart? And Learning from the Path of Our Better Selves, co-authored with Dr. Angela Leslie, promote the capacities of positive identity development and cross-racial bridge building. Lessons from her first teachers served as a major inspiration for Speaking from the Heart, her stories of Chicana, Latina, and Amerindian women. Dr. Barunda's research and publications is now expanding to K-12 curriculum as a means by which to turn the tide of white supremacy. Additionally, Dr. Barunda is a co-founder of the California Indian Curriculum Coalition, whose efforts are focused on the adoption of California Indian vetted curriculum in our schools. And now you will see a video.
Not Hamashak. I'm Rosa Barunda, a professor in the College of Education at California State University, Sacramento. I'm a former school counselor and currently a member of the California Indian History Curriculum Coalition. Living here in Amador County, I would like to acknowledge the Sierra Miwok, upon whose traditional land I now live and from where I transmit this particular communication. Having knowledge of the communities to which we belong provides a sense of psychosocial integration. When our own cultural heritage is acknowledged and affirmed, it contextualizes our relationships with other communities while providing a sense of place and identity. Acknowledgement of our own unique cultural attributes recognizes not only how we came to be where we are, but it instills a sense of agency in determining our path forward. When I served as a school counselor, I facilitated school-wide efforts to address racial discord and gang identification. What became apparent was that when faculty, curriculum, and school practices demonstrated appreciation and integration of diverse cultures and people, intergroup harmony and more pro-school behaviors followed. The discord dissipated when inclusion was evident. In my opening, I also offered what's known as a land acknowledgement by recognizing the original nation of where I now live. By way of practice, our events and gatherings at Sac State open with a land acknowledgement. This is one important step in demonstrating our respect for the Native American people who are the original stewards of the land where we now live. The United States master narrative has not only traditionally neglected to acknowledge original nations, but has disregarded their perspective and experiences in the curriculum offered in our schools. Subsequently, we missed the opportunity to learn from those who've been on this land for thousands of years. By raising awareness of and modeling respect for original nations and the land that we now call home, we begin to develop our own psychosocial integration with the earth and with one another. It's the first step in healing as a nation and in promoting inclusion of all people. There are further steps that can be taken. And as educators of future generations, you're in the position to correct the misinformation that many of us were taught in our K through 12 classrooms by adopting California Indian vetted curriculum so that you, our children's educators, may have access to curriculum that has been California Indian vetted. I'd like to refer you to the Coalition's website. To access this valuable information, you would first of all access our university website at www.csus.edu.
On this website, select the Education button. Then, on this page, select Community Engagement. And from there, you can access California Indian History Curriculum. When you select California Indian History Curriculum, you can discover the background information on the Coalition. This site also contains valuable publications and resources, as well as accessible curriculum that teachers can implement now in their classrooms.
Schools and teachers across California are already using this curriculum offered here. More recently, for example, San Diego Unified School District made Lands of Our Ancestors available for their teachers through their libraries. Authored by Gary Robinson, these 3 books follow 3 generations of a Chumash family from point of contact with Spanish missionaries to early statehood. There's a combined volume available also in addition to corresponding teachers' guides co-authored by California educators Kathleen Chicote Wallace, Dessa Drake, and Fred Messacar, so that 4th grade history social science standards are addressed in your classroom. And I have a copy of his books here, which can be made available to you as an educator and to share with your colleagues. I thank you. I thank all of you teachers for all the work you do to educate our children and shape the way future generations perceive themselves, as well as how they come to respect and honor one another and our earth. So in the language of my mother's people who immigrated to this continent from across the Atlantic, I bid all of you farewell, adios, which means go with God.
For more information, go to https://www.csus.edu/college/education/engagement/California-Indian-coalition.html.
According to Walke and Van Leer, the home language of our English learners plays a major role in the development of their academic identity and overall educational success. Validating a student's culture and language in a safe and encouraging environment will help students develop a positive, confident student self-image. Students' perceptions of how the majority culture accepts or rejects the culture and language they bring to school are extremely important to their eventual success, according to Walke and Van Leer, 2010.
Social and emotional learning, SEL, is an integral part of education and human development. SEL is the process through which all young people and adults acquire and apply the knowledge, skills, and attitudes to develop healthy identities, manage emotions, and achieve personal and collective goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain supportive relationships, and make responsible and caring decisions. SEL advances educational equity and excellence through authentic school, family, community partnerships to establish learning environments and experiences that feature trusting and collaborative relationships, rigorous and meaningful curriculum and instruction, and ongoing evaluation. SEL can help address various forms of inequity and empower young people and adults to co-create thriving schools and contribute to safe, healthy, and just communities. The intersection of social emotional learning and equity is vital. As researcher and author Dina Simmons suggests for liberated SEL, if SEL is implemented out of context and without an anti-racist and equity lens, it could be problematic. To highlight illustrative examples of how SEL and equity can be implemented in tandem, the Improving Education for Multilingual and English Learner Students Research to Practice book from the California Department of Education identifies the following: multilingual centered classrooms and ethnic studies curriculum, oral history projects, and youth participatory action research, YPAR. These practices affirm students' identities, connect with community cultural wealth and funds of knowledge, and deepen students' learning, transferring to civic action. The next feature of culturally sustaining pedagogy that we will explore is schools are accountable to the community. Educators in schools should be in conversation with communities about what they desire and want to sustain through schooling. Gonzalez, Moll, and Amonte, 2005, define funds of knowledge as the notion that people are competent, they have knowledge, and their life experiences give them that knowledge. According to Sethoff, in order to draw on students' funds of knowledge, teachers can create activities, projects, and lessons that allow for students to further the different types of knowledge that they have gathered from the home and their lived experiences and connect it to what they learn in school. Gonzalez proposed a new way to look at culture as dynamic and changing. Often in the education field, culture is used to explain the failure of students, or as the culture in students' households being deficient in cognitive and social resources for learning. Through funds of knowledge approach, the role of the household upholds this view of culture as a process. Gonzalez affirms how the daily activities of everyday life are a manifestation of particular historically accumulated funds of knowledge that households possess. Instead of individual representations of an essentialized group, household practices are viewed as dynamic, emergent, and interactional. This notion can further be applied to viewing communities through the same lens as vibrant and resourceful. Closely connected to funds of knowledge is a critical race theory concept, community cultural wealth, by Yoso, 2005, which further challenges the notion that households and communities of color are deficient. Community cultural wealth is a way to think about the sets of knowledge, skills, and abilities students bring to the classroom. Many times, specific knowledge is valued in a family context, but not in the school context. Yoso highlights 6 forms of capital that communities of color possess: aspirational, linguistic, familial, social, navigational, and resistant. To deepen our understanding, we will hear from another scholar. Dr. Browning Neto, he, him, his, is enrolled in the Citizen Potawatomi Nation. He joined the California State University Chico faculty in 2019, jointly appointed in the School of Education and Department of Multicultural and Gender Studies. He serves as the director of the Northeastern California Preparation and Retention of Indian Educators Grant Program. Additionally, Dr. Neto is the chair of the National Art Education Association's Commission on Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. Furthermore, he holds a position on the National Advisory Council for the National Conference on Race and Ethnicity in American Higher Education. In California, Dr. Neto is involved with statewide ethnic studies curriculum in K-12 schools. At CSU Chico, he is the chair of the Ethnic Studies Ad Hoc Subcommittee, which is responsible for AB 1460 details for the university. Finally, Dr. Neto is a board member of the Chico Arts and Cultural Foundation and the Apakani Early College Charter School. In 2020, CSU Chico's Office of Diversity and Inclusion presented him with the Promising Newcomer Award. Prior to CSU Chico, Dr. Neto was an assistant professor of education at CSU Monterey Bay. As an assistant professor, he earned the Academic Senate's 2019 Faculty Award for Excellence in University Service. In 2019, he also earned the California Council for the Social Studies Diversity and Social Justice Award for his research and practice. Prior to becoming a tenure-track faculty member in the California State University system, Dr. Neto was a California public school elementary teacher and adjunct faculty member at public and private universities. Dr. Neto has 3 lines of research under the larger umbrella of student engagement: Native American culturally appropriate representation in schools, agricultural education, and arts education. He explores issues, challenges, and misconceptions of content integrity and draws connections between the lines for interdisciplinary studies and education. His latest publications center on storytelling. In addition to publishing his work, Dr. Neto presents his research at international, national, state, and local conferences.
Bojo Jack, Dr. Browning Neto Ndejikas, Shishibendiak Indibendagwes. Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Browning Neto. I'm an enrolled citizen Potawatomi Nation. Education is a powerful tool in understanding the world. Culturally sustaining pedagogies as it relates to literacy provides an opportunity for better understanding yourself, your community, and your neighbor. Have you ever taken a moment to sit back and reflect on your educational journey? Think about the schools you attended, the teachers you had, and the friendships you formed. While in this moment of reflection, imagine walking into one of your classrooms. Do you see a classroom library? Your teacher may have paid for that entire library out of their own pocket. Go ahead and walk over to the classroom library. Look at all of those books. Picture looking at all of the books in your classroom library. Name 3 books that you recall being included in your classroom library where you saw yourself, your identities, and your family accurately represented. Can you name 3 books? How about 2 books? How about 1 book? In my view, culturally sustaining pedagogies include valuing our students' lived experiences, celebrating their identities across the curriculum, including in literacy, intentionally integrating their home language or languages into the learning environment. Language is central to understanding our homes, communities, and the world. As teachers, we must deliberately invite our students to bring their whole selves to the classroom, not a cookie cutter version. We must actively show our own inquiring minds about diversity in our learning environments and acknowledge that we are teachers, but our students teach us too. Culturally sustaining pedagogies require educators to seek ways to honor the cultures of their students. Students are not only consumers of culture, but they are builders of culture, and how culture is realized and honored for the 7 generations before and after their time. Culturally sustaining pedagogies requires us to look at ways, as educators, to encourage our students to critique and question structures that they notice and observe in society. In short, culturally sustaining pedagogies open up windows and doors for creating a more just and vibrant learning environment that is steeped in best practices and in supporting the literacy of all students. Miigwech, thank you.
At the center of the comprehensive and integrated literacy model is MTSS and Best First Instruction, which supports state priorities 4, 7, and 8. There are 4 quadrants to this model, first of which is family and community engagements. The resources that support that are the California Family Engagement Framework and Toolkits and the Early Learning, Family, Partnerships, and Culture, and state priorities 3 and 6. Next is Celebration of Diversity and Asset-Based Approach. The resources that support that are the EL Roadmap, Asset-Based Pedagogies, the California Education for a Global Economy Initiative, State Sealed by Literacy, and State Priority 7. Next is the Whole Child. The resources that support that are the SEL Guiding Principles, Health, Safety, and Nutrition, and State Priorities 5 and 6. And finally, Well-Prepared and Supported Teachers and Leaders. The resources that support that are the Quality Professional Learning Standards, Promoting Equitable Access to Teachers, the California Standards for the Teaching Profession, the California Professional Standards for Education Leaders, California Early Childhood Education and Literacy Teaching Performance Expectations, and State Priorities 1 and 2.
California has many existing policies, guidance documents, and structures designed to improve literacy for all California students. While several investments and initiatives have focused on their implementation, the Comprehensive State Literacy Plan, SLP, provides an opportunity to align and integrate these resources in order to demonstrate how they are connected and best utilized in a coherent way. A comprehensive and integrated literacy model ensures high-quality literacy instruction occurs within the context of inclusive and equitable systems of schooling featuring high levels of engagement, a focus on continuous improvement, and application of the California Multi-Tiered System of Support, MTSS framework. The comprehensive and integrated literacy model described in this section sets the direction for literacy programs statewide by aligning and integrating state literacy initiatives. It also sets the direction for activities outlined in the SLP continuous improvement process section.
Inherent to the work being done with the California State Literacy Plan is the idea of family and community and engagement. Parents, caregivers, and families are essential partners in promoting literacy and language development for their children. Resources include the following. California guidance documents include the California Family Engagement Framework and Toolkit, Early Learning, Family Partnerships and Culture, and Improving Education for Multilingual and English Learner Students. Relationships. Since relationships are key to school success in supporting all students, connect with family and community partners regularly to deepen relationships, learn about their perspectives and emerging needs, and authentically bring them into decision-making. Continuously improve communication practices. Regularly convene coalitions, monitor progress, and communicate. An additional resource is the SEL Roadmap for Sustaining Practices, which can be accessed at http:// bit.ly/SEL for reopening. Engaging stakeholders and plan development through meaningful engagement is an annual, ongoing process. Although requirements of the stakeholder engagement and involvement process differ somewhat between the Local Control and Accountability Plan, the LCAP, and the school plan, the purpose of the process is the same: to facilitate an involvement process through meaningful engagement with stakeholder groups and to incorporate collected feedback into the relevant plan. The California School Dashboard contains reports that display the performance of local education agencies, also known as LEAs, schools and student groups on a set of state and local measures to assist in identifying strengths, challenges, and areas in need of improvement. Identifying resource inequities may include identifying ways in which a program may be unfair or lack inclusion. Fairness in this context means that one's personal characteristics, for example, their gender, their socioeconomic status, or their ethnic origins, are not an obstacle to achieving one's potential. Inclusion in this context means that learning expectations and a standard level of education applies to all students. Identifying areas in a school program in which some students are not held to the same standards may result in the identification of a resource inequity. Other examples of resource inequities may include lower quality books and instructional materials, less access to laboratories, outdated computers, significantly larger class sizes, or less qualified or experienced teachers. Identification of resource inequities may involve the identification of current strategies and practices that are contributing factors to the identified inequities. Please visit https://www.cde.ga/LC/planning LCAP school plan.asp for more information. A major shift in transitioning to dismantle racism in schools is to remove the colorblind myth. Django Paris and H. Sami Alim write in Education Week Teacher, no matter how well-intentioned, when a teacher claims that they don't see color, they are engaging in colorblind rhetoric that is harmful to communities of color. Students and communities of color must be seen, acknowledged, and affirmed. We have to recognize the differences that have led to the inequities that we aim to address. Milton Reynolds expands on this concept in the following video. Milton Reynolds is an educator, author, and activist in the Bay Area. He formerly served for over a decade as senior program associated with Facing History and Ourselves. Before joining Facing History, he spent over 10 years as a middle school teacher, a diversity communications consultant, and as a curriculum design specialist. He has over 30 years of counseling experience as well. He's dedicated to improving dialogue and implementing innovative solutions to address difficult social issues such as race relations and juvenile justice and delinquency concerns. Milton sustains a high level of engagement in his home community.
Hello, my name is Milton Reynolds. I'm a Bay Area educator, author, and equity practitioner. I was asked by a friend and colleague, Jennifer Elliman, to share a few thoughts about culturally sustaining pedagogy. It's actually a really good time to be thinking about culturally sustaining pedagogy because it can offer up a structural approach to thinking about inequity. Why I say this is important is right now as a society, we're really moving out of a colorblind understanding of inequity in which the focus was on individual actions and behaviors rather than a systems or a structural analysis which roots the inequities in the practices and policies of the systems and structures themselves. And so culture sustaining pedagogy is an opportunity to think about things from a structural perspective. It acknowledges that the educational system, in a historical sense, was designed on a set of notions about intellect and ability, and a set of assumptions that these ideas were not just that intellect was not just fixed, but ascribed along lines of race, class, and gender, can provide us some insights into the patterns of outcomes that we see within our school systems. From a historical perspective, we can actually see that these outcomes are not glitches, but rather design features of the system. So if we want our schools to function more effectively and do the work that we need them to do, rather than the work that we were designed to do, we're going to have to look towards different approaches. And culturally sustaining pedagogy and practice is one of them. I appreciate it because it talks actually about, it can focus on the nexus of where the disconnect oftentimes happens, and that's in the classroom. Um, you know, one of the challenges that colorblind framing offers us or presents us is that it posits all identities as universal. We live in a society in which that's never been the case. And so asking students to perform some sense of fitness by mimicking a set of cultural realities or histories that doesn't reflect their own isn't the most generative or useful. In fact, it doesn't provide them the sort of reflective um, and the reflective relevance that would cause them to invest the energies in the first place. And as we all know as educators, or at least should, relevance is the gateway to rigor. And so if it's not meaningful or relevant, most students won't do the work. For that matter, most adults won't either. The other thing we should understand about culturally sustaining pedagogy is that it's actually a response to the system, not the students themselves. For many people, the term culture tracks in their mind or in their mental maps in the same way that race does. And it can feed a sort of essentialist understandings of the nature of the problem. As somebody who's been involved in a lot of teacher professional development, I'm oftentimes surprised by why some teachers will gravitate towards things like grit, culture of poverty narratives, or even in some ways simplistically trauma narratives that root the problem in the students themselves rather than the way that the systems are assigning meaning to the students. And there's a danger that the same thing could happen with culturally responsive practices. So it's important for educators to understand that this is not about the students, but rather about how they're experiencing the system. So the intervention is on the system, not on the students. Schools are a public resource, and as such, they should reflect not just the needs of the community, but also the needs of the larger society. Anybody who's paying attention to the news cycle can see that as a nation that we're deeply divided. I would be among those that would argue that part of the way we understand some of our deep divisions is to understand that the narrative of history that's been fed to our students is less than nutritious, and it certainly hasn't been civically generative, or at least not towards a collective. One of the challenges many of our BIPOC and other marginalized students face is that after desegregation, which is oftentimes narrated as a national success, students lost access to their narrative, to their history. That history included their contributions, but also included analysis of what they were struggling against. So in some respects, this current pivot towards a structural analysis is actually a reclamation of a narrative that students had in the past and actually lost. The other thing I would say about desegregation is our students are presently in classrooms in which those in the front of the classrooms don't oftentimes reflect that those who are in the seats, which means that oftentimes if they enter conversations, and particularly conversations about difference, that they may be entering them with different outcomes or objectives in mind. BIPOC or other marginalized students are asking questions about difference and interrogating these ideas because they're seeking solutions or understandings about existential threats that they are challenges that they're facing. From the perspective of a teacher, and that would be particularly true of a white teacher or any teacher socialized under colorblindness, their goal in that conversation is to avoid being implicated as a bad person, right? So we have to understand that when we get into these conversations, we're not talking about good people or bad people. We're trying to understand the history of a set of ideas and a history that is assigned value to us differently. And as educators, it's important to understand that one of the institutions that did that heavy lifting was schools themselves. And so this is really about reforming our systems. And these are the kind of reforms that we're going to need as a collective to close the gap between our articulated vision of democracy and our daily practice. So in closing, I think embracing culturally sustaining pedagogy is a process, not an event. For career educators, you have time to develop a practice that's nutritious and allows you to predictably create better outcomes for your students. And as a nation, let's be clear, we need to do this work, and it's kicking the can down the road rather than having an honest reckoning with our past that's led to the present moment. We have to do better, and we will do better. Thank you for your practice. Thank you for your time, and let's get that work done. Take care. Be safe. Be well.
There are several layers to deconstruct as we endeavor in this work together. Continue learning about culturally sustaining pedagogy in part 2 of this series. Topics covered will include curriculum that connects to cultural and linguistic histories, sustaining cultural and linguistic practices while providing access to the dominant culture, and you will hear from more expert scholars on this timely topic.
Thank you for viewing part 1 of Culturally Sustaining Pedagogy. Access the discussion questions to deepen your learning with your colleagues, and make sure to watch part 2 in this series. Thanks.